Welcome to Accord. We live in a data-driven research world, and data comes in all sorts of size and formats. So my traditional training was in bioinformatics, specifically in single-cell analysis. So I deal a lot with spreadsheet data and RNA-seq type data and things like that. But other researchers deal with text data, whether it's natural language processing or something similar. Other researchers deal with data that comes in the form of images. And then there are numerous other types of file formats that I'm not going to touch on here. One might be XML files. But the base idea being that data comes in huge, vast quantities in all sorts of different formats. And in today's research climate, more data is better. And we have an increasing need to protect this data. However, data-driven research is rapidly getting much too large for our laptops. So specifically to my research in general, I do a lot of single-cell analysis, and the amount of data that we have now, I can't actually run on my local laptop anymore due to memory constraints. So I have to run everything on a cluster or some sort of high-performance platform. And that's kind of where research computing comes in as an organization. Research computing aims to empower researchers by utilizing data-driven approaches on a much larger scale. So when you have memory constraints or time constraints and what you're traditionally running on your computer doesn't work anymore, clusters and high-performance computing is a great option to move your research onto in order to enable that productivity. Now, what type of data can be analyzed on a high-performance cluster? Here at UVA, we typically break things down into two standard zones. We have a standard security zone and a high security zone. Now, a standard security zone is traditional de-identified data, or what we used to call non-sensitive data. And typically only larger schools across the country and across the world are going to have their own shared HPC. And if that data all of a sudden is identifiable, let's say there's any sort of identifying information, that data then has to be moved to the high security zone. And that could be any type of identifiable information, including HIPAA, ITAR, or FERPA data. And even fewer schools have their own high security shared cluster at their university. So what happens as more and more data moves to the high security zone? So like we mentioned before, many schools don't have the infrastructure or personnel to support highly sensitive data. And that can limit research involving population-centric data like PII and FERPA data, ITAR, and even bioinformatics data as it's becoming more and more identifiable. And in general, data is just moving in the sensitive direction. So here at UVA, we used to classify data as non-sensitive and sensitive. Nowadays, we're classifying it as sensitive and highly sensitive. And most data comes with some sort of security requirement where you have to acknowledge that the data will be protected in some sort of way. And even if a school has a high security zone, collaborations typically involve sponsoring accounts for outside users. So let's say you have a grant with a couple different universities and you need to share and access that data at the same time. You'd have to find a place to store it. You'd have to possibly sponsor accounts for those outside researchers. And a lot of schools don't even support that, not to mention a lengthy process with going through it all in the first place. So we have a couple different challenges in research today. We have a growing need to analyze sensitive data and find a way to keep it safe. And we also just have a huge increase in the amount of data that is forcing us to move to high performance computing type options. And this is where Accord comes in. So Accord stands for Assuring Controls Compliance of Research Data. And it's a web accessible secure platform which allows researchers from Virginia public universities to analyze and store their sensitive data in a central location. Now, I will mention that we have a couple of researchers on the call from out-of-state universities. And yes, I'm not excluding y'all. We do have a exemption for COVID-related projects where they can use the Accord system as well. Now, Accord has a couple general goals. The first is that it's designed to encourage collaboration between research partnerships across institutions. So we need a system to manage the risks associated with sensitive data sharing. And Accord does this by signing a membership agreement between UVA and the home institution of the researcher, where we clearly define who is in charge of what in terms of the risk associated with sharing that data. Accord gives researchers from Virginia public colleges and universities access to a community computing system that's capable of processing and storing sensitive data. And this is especially important for schools that lack the critical mass of researchers to invest in staffing or technical resources for such systems. So one of the nice things about Accord is that it's project-based, which means that you can have multiple PIs and you can have multiple people accessing that project space at the same time and working collaboratively. What kind of data can be placed on the Accord system? As of now, the Accord system supports de-identified PII data, FERPA data, business confidential, and other types of sensitive data. And as I mentioned before, most data in today's research world is sensitive to a certain degree, which means a lot of data qualifies for being on the Accord system. However, there are limits to the Accord system, and as of now, we do not support any sort of identifiable HIPAA data, CUI, FISMA, or PCI data. And the best part about Accord is that thanks to the NSF, it is a free service to researchers. And here is a link to the abstract in case you want to check that out as well. So now that we know how Accord operates and kind of the ideas behind it, how does it actually work? Accord is project-based, which means that investigators or PIs can request access to the platform. And once they have access and they've gone through onboarding, they can invite co-investigators, whether it's from their home institution or another institution that we have a membership agreement with. They're able to store their data, which every project comes free with 1 terabyte of data storage. And if they need more, they're able to request or purchase that as well. And they're able to use application-based computing environments. Similar to a cloud computing type system, you are able to spin up one of these environments, do your data analysis on them, and then close them and store all the results. As of now, we support RStudio, JupyterLab, and Theia Python, with more coming really soon. And we welcome any sort of feedback for types of environments that you would like to see on the system as well. Now, because we are in the midst of migrating our system from the cloud development environment to our on-grounds production system here at UVA, I'm not going to go in and do a live demo of the system, but I am going to just show you a general overview of what the dashboard looks like. So if you're familiar with AWS at all, this actually looks a lot like AWS. And you will be automatically logged into your dashboard where you will see at the top your projects that you belong to. So let's say you have one project that will be for a specific grant, but let's say you have 3 different grants and you want all of that data to be stored on Accord. You can have multiple projects and they're all separated with their own project space. So you'd select what project you are going to work on. Then you'd be able to select from one of the containers that you want to spin up. So like I mentioned before, we have Jupyter Python, we have RStudio, and we have Theia Python available, and all of these have command line access as well, or terminal access. Once you hit start on one of these sessions, it will be moved down here to the current sessions tab, and it'll open up in a new tab where you'll be able to do all of your data analysis, and then you'll be able to close that session. And once you close it, it will automatically be moved down to this recent sessions tab, which is a great feature of Accord. And so let's say you come back the next day and you want to launch the same exact environment with the same size specifications, you can just go ahead and click the launch button from the recent sessions, and it'll spin up that same session again. Now, onboarding for Accord is easy to break down into kind of 3 general flow charts. The first is Accord right for me? The very basic question. So what type of data do I have? Do I have some sort of de-identified health information? Do I have any type of student information? Do I have any business confidential information? Or do I have any other potentially sensitive information that needs to be protected? And like I mentioned before, that's a lot of data in today's research world. So let's say you have one of those types. Then the next step would be to check your institutional membership. So the nice thing about Accord is that it works on a membership agreement basis between UVA and the home researcher's institution. And the great part is that once you have one contract signed, it works for the entire university. So let's say you have a collaborator who's already using Accord from your university, then you can skip all of this and move directly to requesting access to Accord. If you are the first researcher from your university to request access, then we will need to sign a membership agreement. So you will request the membership agreement. Your institution will then sign it and send it back to us. We will then approve it and pass it back along to you. And then you will be able to request access to Accord as well. And then the final step here, once you submit your request, will just be to wait for project approval. And then you'll be able to complete the onboarding training and setup process. And then you're good to go and you're able to start using Accord. Next steps in terms of action items that I'd love to see from y'all is to sign up to onboard yourself to Accord. We're ready to go and we're happy to start onboarding people. So I actually have a Google form online and I'm going to go ahead and paste this link in the chat. And it's really simple. All you need to do is navigate to the page. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. All we need from interested researchers is your name, your university, and your email address. And then after I grab all this stuff together, I will be in contact within the next week or so to get the whole onboarding process started. Now, if you want to learn more, you are welcome to visit our homepage, which is on our research computing website. And feel free to contact me at wr8yp@virginia.edu. Again, my name is Will Roseno, and I'm happy to help with any questions you might have. So now that I've given you a brief overview of the Accord system, I'd love to take this next time to answer any questions that you might have and open up the floor for a Q&A. Thanks for your time.
Well, if I might, just for those who don't know me, I'm Ron Hutchins, Vice Provost for Academic Technologies here at UVA and one of the PIs on the Accord project. One thing just to add carefully, Will is exactly right about the types of data we can hold. The agreements that we have offer an option for doing protected health data if we do a bunch more work around building the documentation around it. So if you're grumbling now saying, well, wait, I thought this was supposed to be for protected, identified health data, it is possible, it's more work. So let me just stop there and see if that makes things better or worse. So I'll apologize for jumping in, Will.
No, thank you, Ron. That's an important clarification. Any general questions about the system?
Well, following up on that, I wanted to know, what if you have a category of data? So specifically, the two people I'm interested in onboarding will be using sensitive microcensus data, and I still need to talk with with the professor involved. But for something that's sensitive but isn't in one of it's like in the other category. I mean, how do we go about getting that all squared away and make sure we're not breaking any rules? Like, do we have to talk with somebody at the Accord, in the Accord, administration, or how do we, go over that or review that sort of thing? Or is that totally on us?
Will, if you don't mind, let me jump in on that one.
Yeah.
Eric, I think the thing to say here is that the Accord system is a compliant, capable system. Now, that's a really fine point here. Yeah. But if you're doing the research contract is with your university, and the data is under your control, you are responsible for the compliance for the entire system. And what we will give you is a list of things that we provide that will contribute to that compliance. But at the end of the day, you are responsible for the entire system's compliance. And if I'd be glad to work with you on this one. I would love to see what the rules are around protecting this data and see if it fits into our agreements that we have. And if not, then we can approach legal counsel and see if we couldn't patch it to make it work. Yes. But at the end of the day, you're the ones who have to ensure that the compliance is there, and we will provide parts of that in partnership with you. Does that make sense?
Yes. I just wanted to, yeah. Right. I understand. Thank you.
If it was CMS data, not CMS, the Medicare data, I would say all bets are off. You go to jail if you leak that data. But census data, I think, may be something that we could work out a way to deal with. I'd love to try anyway. So we can talk about
we'll
that.
have to get back to you on that. Thank you.
All right, great. Looks like we have another question here.
Oh, hi, I'm Carola Haas at Virginia Tech. Thanks for a quick explanation of this service. It looks awesome, as you said, huge needs. So the sort of data that I work with are sensitive because it's endangered species locations. And one of our collaborators is the state game department, and they don't have a mechanism that it can allow me as a state university faculty member to access their systems and vice versa. So would you allow state agents, other state agencies to access the Accord system, or does it have to be a university?
That's a very good question. Honestly, we have not talked about that one before, but I imagine that there might be a way in terms of sponsoring accounts. Ron, do you have any general ideas on that?
Well, I think, as you said in your presentation, this is project-based. And, part of Accord is the federation of accounts across the public universities, right, with in common. If that isn't available, then I think we'll just answer the question. If your folks at the state game office would get a sponsored account at UVA, then that would allow them access. What I'm trying to figure out is, could they get a sponsored account with Virginia Tech that would then work with your federation and come in that way rather than having to get an account with UVA? And I don't know the answer, but Carola, that would be a good question for us to approach. I'd love to talk to you about that more.
Yeah, and either one of those should work. You should be able to access the system and collaborate that way.
Great. And then I have another question that right now our technicians enter data using access forms. It really helps us with, we get much better quality data entry if we make it very simple for the people who are doing the entry. So access forms have been helpful for that. Would it be possible? And right now we have it like loading into one of our Virginia Tech servers, but then only Virginia Tech people can access it. Would it be possible to connect an access form directly to the Accord database so it uploads directly, or we could just do a transfer after each update?
Yeah, that Scott might be able to jump in on that. I think in this early phase, the data transfer is probably going to be our best bet, but I could see down the line us incorporating some sort of system where it can automatically import that data as well. Scott, do you have any comments on that?
I mean, the quick answer is that every time we create an access to an external system from inside this environment, we sort of have to go through an InfoSec review and check things out. So I'm always super reluctant to predict what InfoSec is going to say. Sometimes they surprise me in both ways. So there's a caveat about that. We do have a pretty simple mechanism for uploading. It's a little bit of a pain if you've got to replicate, the database, the access forms database. There are larger questions about this with our current containerized platform than are just about this data access piece. So I would caution that there's that. I think we're envisioning certain kinds of access through predefined containers that have a particular software stack. So the three that Will kind of showed you in the demo are what are there. That's not to say we can't consider adding more, but it's I think what you're talking about is it touches many moving parts, right? So if these were flat files or, Parquet files or something like that you were using with one of the kind of existing containers, it's a lot easier for us to answer that question. And so, I mean, definitely don't rule it out, right? Tell us what it is you're trying to accomplish, and we can look at it and see if it's a thing we can get there. But in the simple case, we can't say, oh, sure, tomorrow.
Yeah, no, right. It sounds like it'd be a lot easier for us to just export the data every once in a while and upload it rather than trying to build that connection.
To start out with, that's vastly easier. And that's something we can do like more or less on day one. So, so that works a little better. And backing up to the previous question about the state wildlife, agency, DWR, or whoever they are, we do have a mechanism. I don't know if they need to, I'm not sure what the terms are of the data sharing, and a lot would hinge on that. But if it's really just a question of them needing to have a means to park the data somewhere where you're allowed to work on it, then we could, there is a mechanism without them being provisioned in Accord to allow for data to be uploaded, so we have a secure transfer endpoint that would allow for external collaborators or people who are sharing data with you all to upload data into the system for you to work on without them having to be provisioned as part of the project. So, again, I guess that the devil is always in the details.
Great, very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Those are great questions. Any other questions?
Simple one here. Some of us were onboarded during as guinea pigs during the development process. Do we need to onboard again, or are our accounts still good?
Nope, you will be good to go. We
right.
are transferring all that data from co-manage over to our production system. So yeah, you will not need to do anything else on your part.
Thanks.
Hi, James Dunson, Virginia Tech Geosciences. A couple of questions. One is about sort of the scale of the data and how what plans you have for like getting data into and out of the system. The geoscience data that we're working with typically is it's not big data by big people standards, but it's many tens to several hundreds of terabytes. So it becomes a little bit problematic to just shuffle around arbitrarily.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the primary resource for getting data in and out is going to be through Globus, which I believe Virginia Tech has too. But it's a great system where you just set up endpoints, and Globus does the entire transfer for you, and make sure that none of the files are corrupted. And it'll even send you an email once it's finished transferring over. But that is going to be our primary data transfer tool in and out, and it's great for large amounts of data like terabytes.
Yeah, and I just wanted to echo the state agency. We have people with the working with like coastal hazards and karst topography and all that, work with the state geologist office and various other agencies. In our case, I think most of those would be co-PIs under a Virginia Tech PI. So as I understand it, since the agreement is with Tech and the PI would be Tech, that would be covered in that fashion, correct?
So it's going to depend on a couple of things. I know we asked the question about the Virginia Department of Transportation, who just wanted access to our computers, just because they're a state agency. We were able to do that through an MOU, and they're going to pay us for that. So it may require us to do, with any other state agency, to do an MOU with them, just to say, as a state agency, you're claiming responsibility, blah, 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 all the things lawyers do. If they're coming through you directly as a PI or co-PI, my assumption is you're managing all of that. And this is what I'd like to check with our lawyers on, that if you give them a sponsored account at Virginia Tech, that can come in through our normal onboarding process, and they have to do the onboarding process and the training just like everybody else. But I think other than that, I think that would be it. So that's what I want to check. So I'd love to check both Carola for you and James for you to make sure that that's accurate, and then see what we can do. That'd be great.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not sure Tech still has an active Globus infrastructure due to cutbacks, but this might be an excuse to pick that back up. We'll see.
We'll have to talk to Mark about that.
Mm-hmm.
We don't, Ron. That's a casualty of the COVID budget cuts.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll talk to Scott about that. See if we can get some help there.
Yeah, we do have a couple.
Other Scott.
Yeah, we have a couple ideas getting around that. Scott, do you want to?
No, I was just going to say there's really no requirement that any participating agency have their own Globus agreement, right? You may be stuck as a researcher, or your collaborator may need to revert to using the free personal edition on some data server or whatever. But those connections are covered by our BAA, and that is a mechanism for securely getting the data. We'd have to coordinate, and obviously the technical expertise certainly exists at Virginia Tech, even if the licensing for hosting their own shared collections doesn't exist. So that's really the only distinction kind of there. I don't think it's a showstopper at all.
Great questions. Any other questions?
So in my work so far, I've been, fooling around with the Jupyter notebooks, and I've noticed that I believe you get either one core or with two threads or two cores. I'm not sure exactly what it provisions. I think that it does one core with two hyperthreads. I'm not sure, but so will there be possibilities in the future of like requesting like 8 cores, or like for parallel or series of jobs running simultaneously, things like that?
Yeah, exactly. So our current idea, and Scott, feel free to jump in here as well, but we're going to have some sort of small, medium, large containerized environment that you pick from at the beginning, and those will have different combinations of memory requirements, cores available, and things of that nature.
Right.
Scott, anything else to add on that?
I mean, there really isn't. That they'll be predefined. Neil is probably the more pertinent person than me for this, but if it turns out that someone has a need and we have the resources, I'm sure we can define a new flavor. But yeah, it's you'll see the limited initial set.
Yeah.
And what is roughly the amount of resources available, like totally, just so we have an idea?
There are 240 cores, and each of those has about 18, nominally 18 gigabytes of RAM allocated to it. So that's what the basic hardware kind of looks like. So it's conceivable that we could, spin up a fairly large orchestrated little cluster for you for say, distributed Jupyter notebook. But I think the initial plan, and again, I would really defer to Neil McGee, who is architecting all of the Kubernetes part of this, is to try some kind of smaller test cases. But I think if we had, there is more hardware in that row and in that cluster, and it's easy enough to add extra workers, right? And extra Kubernetes nodes that are worker nodes. And so if someone came to us and said, I really need 240 cores for my instance, we could have a conversation about that. Ron, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think okay, there we go. I think we're interested in seeing, kind of what the limitations are. And, we're willing to throw other hardware at it that isn't necessarily, strictly the Accord hardware in the instance. We're trying to rebuild our hardware fabric so that we've got, just easily, quickly redeployable hardware that we can throw into whichever particular environment. I know that's really vague, Eric, and if you can give me more details out of band, I'm happy to give you a better answer.
No, that's a great answer. I was more asking like, oh no, you're only getting one core for everything you do in Accord, and I realized that was probably not the answer, but I just wanted to know roughly where we were going with that. So that's a fine answer. Like
we don't know we don't have policy limits yet because we don't know. And I think we just want to get users on and using it. And if it turns out that, darn, we have to go back and ask for a supplement to triple the size of the hardware. I mean, we would hate to have that problem, right?
And that's one of the things I just wanted to add. We've created this system for what we think will meet a lot of needs. It won't meet everyone's needs, but we want to know what are the needs out there. What does everyone want for a system like this? So we can adapt. We are adaptable. We can modify the system up to a point, funding provided and all of that. So if anyone has any suggestions of what they would like to see as the next generations of the system, we would love to hear it.
Thank you.
This is Robin Anderson from James Madison. I think related to that, especially since this is funded through NSF, a large number of our NSF projects involve institutions outside of the Commonwealth. And so looking at opportunities that's been our primary challenge, is with institutions outside of the Commonwealth. So I think in looking at next generation or looking at next permissions for the system would be the ability to onboard, say, co-PIs of NSF grants from other states would be very helpful.
We can do that today. They just have to go through the same process that you've gone through. If you are, one of the things that we've been sensitive to is if we open up a cord to anybody in the country, I think we'd be overwhelmed, and we're trying to be careful with that. So stating it's a Commonwealth of Virginia project, but if you have collaborators, there's no reason we can't bring in your outside collaborators through the same process.
Yeah, exactly. And that could be some sort of sponsored account process sort of thing as well.
Yeah, similar to what you were talking about with non-institutional entities such as departments of the Commonwealth.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And as Will mentioned before, we have a supplement from NSF to help support COVID research around the country. So we have several entities outside of the state of Virginia today that are onboarded to do COVID research on Ivy. That's another constraint that allows us to open it up for a good reason, but not open it up to everybody in the world. So again, we would love to serve everybody. We're trying to find a way to serve the people that we do serve well, rather than try to serve everybody poorly. That's the caveat.
Hi, this is Ali Vadati from ECU. Thank you for organizing this and giving us access to a cord. My first question is about GPU capability. Do you have any GPUs, especially for double precision floating point calculations?
Everything we have are double point or double precision. They are V100s. They are NVIDIA V100s, and there are 16 of them.
That's excellent. So
yeah.
To get access to that, you need to request basically that for.
Yes, and I'm not sure how what the plan. Again, I'm not the person doing the Kubernetes orchestration, so I don't have a precise answer. It is one of the things on the to be done checklist. But I think it would happen faster. It would be something you would select at the time that you launch launch your whatever your notebook is, your container is, and would request that you need to run on a GPU to do this kind of thing. And I think at this point we probably will just be allocating whole slices of GPU. In other words, kind of a single. So there is a chance if we have a huge number of GPU users, we could arrive at having some contention, but we're working on it.
Yeah, as of now, that'll be listed as an option when you spin up your environment, like Scott said.
Got it. My other question is for the CPU cores that are allocated to each VM. Is there flexibility to change the cache, the CPU cache that is allocated to each core? Do you have that kind of flexibility? The L2, L3 cache, or are these just like all the cores will be the same?
Cores will all be the same.
They'll all be the same. Okay. Do you know how much cache these cores will have?
These are, I tell you, not right off the top of my head, but they are Intel Xeon 6248s.
6248. Okay,
yeah,
that's a Xeon Gold, right? I guess.
This is Xeon Gold, exactly. Yep. And let's see what arc.intel says. Grinding. I should know that off the top of my head, but
that's okay. I can also look. As long as, if I know what's
pretty quickly.
Okay, and these are all basically you can get basically a couple of these 6248 cores. Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Thank you.
James Lesson, Virginia Tech Geosciences again. My next question was related to that. Was any thoughts about, Revote Viz? Paraview is very popular, and particularly when you're dealing with sensitive data, the need to like crunch it and then visit while still keeping all the chain good is definitely one of the thoughts that we wrestle with occasionally. And the other thing that is occurring to me with the discussion of out of state, due to some of the other requirements on some of the other data on the system, is there a prohibition against PIs who are not US citizens, or how is that handled?
That's a good question. On our CUI system, it's absolutely, we could not. I would hesitate to say we can bring in non-US citizens without doing some checking with legal counsel. So let me just say that if you have a specific case, if you want to get with Will and put it in, and then he can ask the question and we can figure it out. The answer may be no, but I wouldn't mind asking the question. So feel free.
Right now, the project involved, the data is not, that they're currently collecting is not sensitive enough that it would probably be a good match for Accord, but it was an example that came up. We've got at least one project that's a collaboration between Virginia Tech and a Korean university in the United Nations, for instance. And that sort of thing has innumerable legal overhead issues.
Yeah. But the other thing, just to state it outright so everybody hears it, is we don't have capability of doing GDPR right now. We're not doing the European Union's general data standard stuff. So that doesn't mean we couldn't, but we're not certified for GDPR. We don't have our processes in place to do the forget me, for example. So we would have to be very careful with doing GDPR data.
And like Ron mentioned, feel free to shoot an email to me with any of these questions, and I'm happy to look into it with our legal team. And James, it looks like you mentioned ParaView. That's open source, correct?
Yes.
I believe that doesn't. We run into issues when it's a license, but if it's open source, that's great. We can mark that down for future use.
Will we have ParaView on Open on Demand?
Yeah,
so
Open on Demand. Yep.
I don't think it'll be a problem to set it up for.
Great. It's a very good recommendation. Thank you.
Just one comment to make for any application requests or anything we're thinking about that has a graphical user interface. So please keep in mind that the whole user interface is running in a web service, if you will. So if you have an application in mind and you know it can be deployed with a web front end, that is probably something we can look at more easily than something that has just support for a desktop graphical user interface, just as kind of like a disclaimer.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Any other questions?
The spreadsheet, do we need to all add our names there? Maybe I missed that, Will. Or is
Ali,
that...
I've got you fully on board and everything.
Oh,
so
okay. I don't need to add. Okay.
Yeah,
I'll remove mine. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
You can leave it on there too. It's only for people who want to be onboarded who are not on the system
Got
yet.
it. Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. These are great questions. Honestly, the best that we've had since we've started hosting these webinars. Any others? All right. Well, great. Well, I don't want to hold you past the time. Ron, do you have any closing statements that you'd like to give?
Well, you know me, you give me an opportunity, I'll talk. But basically, my statement is thank you all for being here. Thanks for your interest. Please understand that we're building this and you are our partners in this. So help us with any information that you have, any questions that you've got. We've had some great feedback from the community and we've tried to act on that. Even if you think it's going to be feedback that we're not going to like, please give it to us because we want to learn from that. So help us out with your partnership and thank you again for being.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I just posted my email in the chat, so feel free to reach out with any questions or if you decide you want to be onboarded and didn't fill out the Excel sheet. But other than that, thank you so much. Thank you for your patience as we build out the system, and we're excited to get you all on board.